Right, Premier Bro's back again. Summer transfer window, lots of activity. The thing that's making the news wire now is a transfer of Noni Madueke from London rival Chelsea over to Arsenal. It's caused a lot of buzz in the news. Some fans not happy with it in Arsenal. Chelsea fans thinking that Madueke has abandoned them. But I'm curious, you as an Arsenal supporter, how do you feel about this move that Arteta and the club have decided to make?
Yeah, Madueke definitely inspired a bit of resistance from a segment of the Arsenal fan base. There are a few reasons for that. I would say, the first thing is, as you mentioned, he's a Chelsea player. Actually, he's previously played at Tottenham, so there's a bit of rivalry history. Arsenal have had a checkered past with the transfers from Chelsea. When you think back to Willian, David Luiz, most recently Raheem Sterling, high-profile players that were bought into Arsenal from Chelsea and didn't really live up to the hype. And Madueke, he's been at Chelsea now for 2 years, was signed for around £29 million, now being signed by Arsenal for £50 million, so almost double his transfer fee. So a lot of Arsenal fans are a bit unhappy with the idea of, Arsenal lining those West London pockets and, £50 million for a player who ostensibly plays in the same position as Saka, because we don't know how Arteta will actually deploy him. But plays in the same position as your superstar in Saka. So essentially would be a backup player. And at 50 million, that transfer fee seems a bit excessive. Beyond that, Madueke has rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. Thinking back to the Wolves game where he made some comments about the city. So there's a lot of reasons, a lot of factors that are kind of in the minds of the Arsenal fans that have led to this opposition, let's say, to this transfer. In addition to the fact that he plays in a position where one of the up-and-coming stars, Nwaneri, has really made a name for himself. People feel that the inclusion of Madueke on the squad may hamper or hinder the development of Nwaneri. When you take that transfer news in isolation, when you think about just having Madueke as your marquee signing for the transfer window, yeah, that's quite underwhelming given the fact that Arsenal have been in need of a high-profile offensive signing, particularly in the striker position. So taking this transfer in isolation, it's not something that one would be overly excited about as an Arsenal fan. But looking at it in the context of an overarching transfer policy, and Arsenal have gone out and made quite a few moves already, bringing in Zubimendi. They've signed Norgaard as well, an experienced veteran from Brentford. They brought in Kepa from Chelsea as a backup keeper. They're looking at bringing in Mosquera, the centre back, and of course, all indications seem to suggest that they will get their main target, Viktor Gyökeres. And the recent news is that they're also looking to bring in Eberechi Eze. Taken in context, I think it's a pretty good signing. Madueke, fast, skillful, very good at progressing the ball, good one-on-one. So as a backup for Saka, that's an incredible option to have off the bench, or as a alternative. Also, he can play on the left wing, giving Martinelli competition to push his development further. It's a move that gives Arsenal more depth. Madueke is a profile of a player that Arsenal have been missing. He likes to play in transition, very direct. Arsenal have been missing that kind of offensive thrust, particularly last season when Saka went injured. But even with Saka in the team, we don't see Arsenal really going at teams at full flight. I see that's as maybe a sign of things to come for Arsenal, maybe a potential shift in the way that they break down teams, playing more in transition. It gives Arsenal more variety in their offensive play, and that cannot be viewed as a bad thing.
Well, what about the transfer fee, right? You mentioned that it's £50 million, and you think about his productivity from last season for Chelsea. 7 goals and 3 assists in the Premier League, and I think he had somewhere around 27 starts.
Mm-hmm.
Not earth-shattering numbers. So what is the strategy? Are they looking for depth, or are they looking for someone to improve the squad and step in and be a match winner when a Bukayo Saka is off, not playing well, or injured? I think that is where Arsenal need the improvement, not necessarily the depth, because Ethan Nwaneri is there. He probably had similar numbers to Madueke last season in the short time that he was able to break into the squad. It seems like Nwaneri can fill the shoes of what they wanted Madueke to do. Madueke is not a left winger. And for everyone from the outside looking in, meaning non-Gunners, non-Arsenal fans like myself, we look and we see Martinelli and we see Trossard on the left and say, okay, there's room for improvement. If they go out into the market and they buy a big player, a match winner, all of a sudden a team that's finished second in the last 3 seasons, maybe that can catapult them into the top slot and win the Premier League. Because Arsenal, what I would say is the ambition is there. They want to win the Premier League. But what I've seen lacking from the team, and especially the manager, and I always go back to this example from not last season, but the previous season when Arsenal were in the driver's seat in the latter stage of the season, went to Manchester City and parked the bus instead of trying to winning the game. And I think the aggression, the lack of aggression from the team, going out and really trying to push instead of saying, okay, well, maybe we'll not try to win this game. We'll try not to lose the game. Are they doing the same thing in the transfer market? And say, well, maybe we're not going to try to get the top player as a winger to bring in on the left, but we'll get someone who can add depth, in case Saka gets injured, and we'll have less of a dip in form. I just wonder about the aggression, like the willingness to really push, like we see City doing. If we contrast that with City, getting Ryan Cherky, getting Ryan Aït-Nouri, getting players who are considered to be kind of game changers, very, very special in their own right. I don't down Madueke in his game at all. I think he's a good player, a solid player. But is he a match winner, a player that can go into an Arsenal and really, really change the trajectory of where the squad will end up at the end of the season? I question that. What do you have to say?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the marquee signing for the transfer window will definitely be Viktor Gyökeres. He's the player that Arsenal will be looking at to take them to that next level. He's the player, the match winner that you're speaking of, that they hope to bring in and be the spearhead of their offense. Madueke, every time I've watched Madueke, and I've watched a fair amount of Chelsea games, he's always a player that you notice. He's always a player that's involved, getting on the ball, trying to make something happen, a lot of endeavor. Of course, it doesn't always work, and he can excite and frustrate in equal measure. But he's a player that doesn't shy away from, taking players on and being involved in the game. The stats are actually pretty impressive when you consider, how many shots he takes per game. I think he's in the top 10 in the league for shots per game. The hope is that with some development, he's still 23, he's not yet the fully developed articles. Arteta, I guess, has been looking at Madueke for some time now. It's not something that has just come out of nowhere. And I get the sense that he has wanted to work with this player. He sees something in him that he admires. The hope is that he's going to improve his end product. The final product is going to improve, whether that be assists or goals, because he's always involved in play. So it's just a matter of getting that end product to a consistent and high level. There's a huge upside for if it goes well, if this move goes well, and he does develop in the way that Arsenal are hoping. I mean, 50 million could be a bargain, actually, right? So time will tell. Of course, you can't really make that assessment now. Hindsight, of course, is the best way to look at these type of transfer fees and see whether they're justifiable or not. We can't tell now. So we'll tell at the end of his career or end of his tenure with Arsenal. But if they go out and they win the Champions League next year, and that's a possibility, we'll look at that 50 million and say, okay, it's a bargain, right? If they go out to win the league, which is a possibility, you look at that 50 million and say, okay, it was worth it. Now, the questions remain, but we can answer those questions after he's been integrated into the team and we see how he develops. There's a lot of potential. We talk about Trossard and Martinelli on the left wing. And, Madueke has played on the left wing. He's played in the left wing a few times. Of course, his natural position is on that right wing, being a left footer, but he can do the job on the left wing. So if only to propel those two players, and we don't know whether Trossard will stay, actually. Been some bids coming in, from Bayern Munich. So we're not sure he will be there next season, but certainly to push Martinelli, and I think Martinelli needs to be pushed. The development has stalled a bit. So a competition on the left flank for Arsenal would definitely be a welcome thing. And Arsenal play 50, 55, 60 games per season now, right? With the Champions League and all the competitions, cups. It's a lot of games. And, just to unburden Saka, unburden Martinelli, who played a lot of games last season. Have a player who can step in and not a drastic dip in form. Nwaneri came in, and I love the player, and I hope that he's very much involved in this season. But he's also a very young player. You don't want to overuse him, run him into the ground as well. So depth is a massive, massive thing. And teams nowadays, we don't necessarily think about starting 11s anymore. We think about squads that rotate, right? So he's an option that enables Arsenal to rotate not only strategically, but in personnel wise. If it was only Madueke coming in, I'd be concerned. But given the context of the transfer window thus far, bringing in a Viktor Gyökeres, and the really exciting prospect is having Eberechi Eze on the roster as well. Take all of those players, Zubamendi, Norgaard, Gyökeres, Madueke. That's a pretty impressive haul for one transfer window, in my opinion.
Well, yeah, if that all comes through, that'll be good for Arsenal, I think. The one thing I will say with Kai Havertz, many questioned Arteta's motivations, his knowledge, even in terms of bringing him in, and why would they bring him in? And he's proven everyone wrong. There were a lot of questions when he came in from Chelsea. How would he fit in? What would he bring to the squad? And he's shown that he was able to fold him into the team and make him a very important player, an important contributor to what Arsenal does. And I honestly believe, even with the impending addition of Viktor Gyökeres, that Kai Havertz will have something to say about that. And we may see some rotation, as you mentioned, not just on the flanks, but also at the number 9, because I don't think Kai Havertz is going to relinquish his spot and just say, here you go. He's going to fight. And when you have a big squad, you want to have competition. It raises the level of the players, and top players respond well to competition. It's the players who are not top players who don't respond well to competition. So I think we'll see, given what I've seen from Kai Havertz, I think we could see a lot from Arsenal if they do pull off the signings. You mentioned Eze. I know he has a clause in his contract. He's a player that I've wanted Manchester United to be going after in the window. And if Arsenal are able to pull off that move, that will be the move. I think
that's a game changer.
That is a very, very special player. In my opinion, one of the best players on the market, if he is indeed on the market. But if Eze moves to Arsenal, then you have to put them going into the season on par with a Liverpool. Just given the untimely loss of Diogo Jota, they have a hole in their squad, and we don't know how they're going to fill it. Obviously, they did bring in Florian Wirtz, who will fit in very well, Frimpong, and also Gyökeres in the right and left back spots. So Liverpool have strengthened, but I think with Arsenal, I think if they're bringing in Eze, and Gyökeres, then that changes things a lot. Without Eze, I'm not as convinced, but we'll see if that deal comes through. I'll be very, very interested to see how the top 4 plays out next season. So you mentioned the name Christian Norgaard, right?
Right.
And we know teams need depth. You mentioned the number of games. All the teams now are playing 50, 60 plus games. The top teams, that is, who are playing in Europe. We saw the Club World Cup this summer. Season just ended for certain teams like Chelsea. How do you feel about Christian Norgaard coming in, 31 years old, player from Brentford, a solid player who's done well, but not a player who's turned heads? If you were talking about top midfielders in the league, I don't think he would come up in anyone's conversation. Mm-hmm. I know he's replacing Jorginho, who is left, Thomas Partey, who is left. Is that a good move, or would you have liked to see something different in the context of Zubamendi coming in as well?
Yeah, I mean, the idea is that he's a backup holding midfielder, a veteran player, plays at international level, a player who has captained his team in the Premier League, a player who has experience, leadership qualities, who is physical. There's a lot of duels. So pretty good aerially. Is he a game changer? No, he's not a game changer. But as a backup center midfielder, he's reliable, consistent, just a solid performer. And Sometimes you need signings like that who are just going to stabilize the team, not a flashy personality, not someone who's going to come in and disrupt things, just someone who's going to get the job done. I think that's a very astute signing. Of course, time will tell how that pans out, but on paper, it seems like a very astute signing. Nothing sensational. You already brought in your midfield superstar in Zubamendi, and you bring in a player who knows the league, can help him to adjust to the league. You already have Marino as well. That's a lot of depth in the midfield, with Declan Rice being the main man and Odegaard. So a good signing, good value, not an expensive signing, won't affect Arsenal's financial flexibility to secure a more high-profile targets. So good signing, in my opinion.
Okay. Yeah, I can't even really comment on his game because while I've seen Brentford play, while I've seen him play many times, I can't say he's ever turned my head to where I said, okay, well, it's a player who should be playing at a bigger squad. You think about a couple other players like Baleba, for example, at Brighton, right? That's a player who's turned a couple of heads playing in a similar position. But I understand the rationale to get a player who can come in and accept
limited
limited role, a bench role, just be happy to be in a big club, to get to play in the Champions League in the latter stages of his career. So we'll see if that pans out. But what I will say, and I mentioned this many times in our discussions, when I saw Jorginho come in, for example, for Arsenal, I always saw a dip in the level of the team, not because of his football brain and his quality. It was the lack of physicality, the mobility, the speed to be able to operate in such a way to allow Arsenal to be successful. I just wonder if Norgaard can come in and do the job in the way that it's needed to be done, right? Because Arsenal, they're looking to win the Premier League. They're looking to win the Champions League. And at that level, I think every player that comes in has to be able to do not just a job, but a job in a certain way, right? And maybe if it's parking the bus at the end of the game, you're in Europe, you need numbers to play a low block, and you have to change the system. Maybe he comes in and he could do a job like that. So give Arteta the benefit of the doubt that he's building a team in such a way that will allow him to accomplish things that he wasn't able to accomplish last season while being close, right? Going to the semifinals of the Champions League, finishing in second for the third time on the trot in the Premier League. Maybe these are the slight adjustments because it's really more of tweaks than it is of the wholesale changes that Arsenal will need. And I agree with you. If Gyökeres comes in, if Eze comes in addition to Madueke, then looking at it in a totalitarian way, looking at the whole product as opposed to each piece of the product, then it's a quite compelling product. And again, we should be expecting Arsenal to deliver next season with this type of output in the transfer market.
Well,
and I know Arsenal fans have always, and I don't want to be too negative about Arsenal fans, but I feel like Arsenal fans have made some excuses for Arteta in the past few seasons. Oh, he's brought us back from where we were. We were out in the cold. Now we're back in the Champions League. We're competing for the league again. But yes, but what's next, right? So I guess as an Arsenal fan, with you seeing the progress, because if we go back to January and even last summer, you were not happy with the moves that they made in the in the transfer windows. Now that you feel a little bit more satisfied, assuming all the deals we just talked about come through, will you now hold Arteta to a higher standard? If he doesn't deliver, will you be calling for maybe his dismissal if the team doesn't win a trophy this next season?
No, I mean, I won't be calling. No, I won't be calling for his dismissal. Absolutely not. Yeah, I mean, you have to hold him to a higher standard when he has a better team. Of course. So bringing in all those pieces, the expectation, the standards have to be raised. What they were clearly missing last season was a goal scorer. If they bring in a goal scorer, for me, that's already enough. I mean, adding depth squad, of course, enables you to really take full advantage of all of the components you have at your disposal. But what was really missing was a goal scorer, right? Just that alone raises the standards. Do I expect Arsenal to win the league? I hope they win the league. Of course, I hope they win the league every year. We look at Arsenal's transfer activity in isolation and you say, okay, this should allow them to win the league, but there are other teams involved, right? So you have to look at what the other teams are doing. How are they raising their levels? You have to look at what Liverpool is doing. They're bringing in a Florian Wirtz, one of the world's best players in his position in the moment. You look at Chelsea, we just saw them in the Club World Cup. They brought in João Pedro. Manchester City with, their new recruits. Supposedly, they'll be a better Manchester City. So, it's not just looking at those moves in isolation. With that said, I absolutely think that Arsenal should be pushing for the title. They're a better team, in my opinion, if all of these moves materialize. And next step for Arsenal, the next step in your development has to be, to get that title, right? Whether it happens in this year or the next 2-3 years, I would like to see it happen in the next 2 to 3 years. Absolutely. I think if it doesn't happen in the next 2-3 years, when you've made this outlay, you have a really good, strong base in the academy where you're bringing through players like Miles Lewis-Skelly, players like Nwaneri. You have a core group of players that has stayed together for a long time. You have the best defense in the league. So all the elements are there for you to take that next step. So I would like to see it happen in the next 2-3 years. Now you're bringing in some new elements which have to be integrated. So you have to give Arteta a little leeway, not much.
More leeway, more 2 to 3 years. That's a long time. That's a long time.
What I don't want to see is Arsenal falling behind. So I don't want them to see their levels drop. If they can push closer to the title, if there's development, and development means you are there until the end, right? You're pushing for that title until the end. You're not dropping off, 2/3 of the season going and you're out of the title race. I want to see you start pushing for the title till the end. That for me would be satisfactory. To win a title, you need a lot of factors other than the team. You need some luck. There's a lot of variables at play. So the expectation is there, but will I call for Arteta's head if he doesn't win the title? No. But do I want to see them challenging for the title? Absolutely. If they're not challenging for the title, that's a different story. Then I may have reservations about Arteta going forward if they're not challenging for the title.
Giving Arteta quite a long leash, but maybe he's earned it. Maybe he deserves it. I would think at least a trophy, if not a Premier League title, a trophy, a final in a competition would be a minimum that he needs to achieve with this squad that he's been able to assemble.
To be honest with you, I don't think many Arsenal fans would be happy with just an FA Cup trophy, right, at this stage. I think the only trophy that would satisfy the hunger, and the hunger is great, right? So many years he's already won the FA Cup, right, in his tenure. Right. That's not what we're looking for.
It was like 5 years ago, though, right?
Yeah. But he's already won. That's not what we're looking for right now. We're not looking for just a trophy. We're looking for a step forward in the evolution of the club. And that means the Premier League title or the Champions League.